Sweden will go further in debt to pay for its newly imported diversity. Let's explore. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. Diversity is a serious business in Sweden. So serious that anything that resembles some sort of fiscal responsibility is to be thrown out on the window because, heaven forbid, diversity feels oppressed or something. Yeah, sure, fiscal irresponsibility measures may harm the largely white and ethnically Swedish working population, but that doesn't really matter since diversity trumps white every single time. Back in February in 2014, the finance minister at the time, Anders Borg, from the Moderate Party, introduced the so-called krona for krona principle, which, the way I understand it, means that no authority, especially the local ones, can initiate any program until they can clearly show they already have the funds for that and don't rely on loans and debt building. The principle itself was agreed upon by all parties at the time, and the new Löfven government, installed at the end of 2014, also respected it. But the principle had two exceptions: healthcare and refugee reception. Of course. So it comes as no surprise that in October the Löfven cabinet allocated an extra 10 billion kronor, which is about 1.1 billion euros, to municipalities just for the end of this year. This 1.1 billion is not coming out of thin air, although they're not being paid for by the current taxpayers, but are taken with interest from institutions such as the IMF or private banks or other investors in bonds. But then you'll say, okay, 1.1 billion euros isn't really such a huge deal. However, last Saturday, December 12, the new Minister of Finance, Magdalena Andersson, announced that the stretching of the krona for krona principle will continue and will be further increased. In a statement for Sveriges Radio, she said, quote, that borrowing will increase next year and as the cost with asylum seekers will also increase. Then, when they enter the labor market, additional resources for social measures are also required. Perhaps resources for different actions will be required, and thus it would not be appropriate to fund them on the krona for krona principle. In fact, the entire statement is a testament of the absolute lunacy of the Swedish establishment. For instance, this Sveriges Radio article mentions that the krona för krona principle has long been criticized by Landsorganisationer i Sverige, or the Swedish Trade Union Confederation, because the principle limits deficit and prevents the government from investing in jobs. Because we all know that it's the government responsibility to invest in jobs, and we all know that this always ends well. But perhaps the economic illiteracy is the smallest issue with this whole thing. What is indeed a lot more troubling is the ideology behind this madness. After dismissing the Swedish Trade Union Confederation's criticism, Magdalena Andersson added that, and this is a direct quote, obviously, as a finance minister, you want as soon as possible to get an opportunity to introduce unfinanced reforms. End of quote. Now let that sink in. As a finance minister, it is obvious, as in everyone knows, and it's perfectly acceptable and normal to look as hard as you can to find more ways to increase the debt of your nation. This is the ideology driving Sweden. And for the Americans watching this is the ideology that's driving your federal government as well. And mind you, there's an old white Bolshevik who wants to be president and wants to make you even more like Sweden. If you think this is a joke, you're not paying attention. But anyway, what this means in practice is that Sweden's economic situation is bound to get a lot worse during 2016, and the accumulation of debt is bound to accelerate. In 2014, Sweden's government debt to GDP ratio was 43.9%, but that was after most of the year being led by a fiscally conservative government and still a lot higher than the 2011 level, when it stood at just 36.2%. I suspect in 2015 it would have already exceeded 45%, and by 2018, when elections are due, the rate will be at 60% if all of these policies are respected, and I see no reason for them not to be respected. I mean, nobody can dare suspect a socialist not delivering on the promise to spend more from other people's money, and from money he doesn't even have yet, and there is no guarantee that he will. More to the point, as the exodus of talented and productive people continues, and it does, and also as the influx of third world diversity continues, the economy as a whole will shrink. Now sure, the GDP itself may not shrink, since all government spending is also counted in the GDP, sometimes twice, just ask the Keynesian economists who make these shiny graphs, but the economy itself will have to take a kick in the teeth, because you cannot really have growth if your most productive people are leaving. And yes, I know this is offensive, the official ideology in Sweden being that there is no such thing as gifted children, and thus no such thing as gifted and superiorly productive people. You will apologize me for this horrible transgression. There may be some good news though. Many local politicians, even from the political parties in power, are getting sick and tired of this virtue signaling and the metastatic political correctness. The local government in Karlstad issued plastic signs for every citizen to put on his door. The sign read, "Openness, yes, thank you." But then the politician who initiated this refused to put one on his own door, and was followed by all but one local politician, namely Per Inge Lidden, who is from the most pro-immigration party, namely Miljöpartiet de Gröna. This may indeed kick off similar reactions in other regions, as Karlstad is a place from which change has started in Sweden in the past as well. For instance, the most significant coup d'etat in modern Sweden started there, and also the agreement to dissolve the union with Norway was also signed there. Nevertheless, this is the first time, that I've seen at least, when local politicians are taking a bold action against the so-called progressive consensus and simply refusing to abide by the stupidity of the establishmentarians. If these kinds of slow acts of disobedience continue, maybe there is some hope that things won't go full Macintosh and there will still be a Sweden to save in 2018. Maybe. Anyway, these are the latest updates from Sweden, and I'll continue to keep an eye on the situation, not because I want things to go wrong, but because Sweden is a little peek in the future of all of us if we don't draw the appropriate lessons from the Swedish experience. And with that being said, thank you for watching, and I'll see you around with an alternative.